Hi guys, so we're back for another interview and we're between two trees, as you can see. We have a special guest with us, you might recognise him. If not, this is Luke Watson!
Hello!
So, Luke, we haven't seen you for a while. So
Yep, who has? Who's seen anyone for a while?
Actually, you featured on our first
I did, yeah.
When We Youth Online, didn't you? So
Yeah, don't know how that went down.
I think it went
But,
okay.
don't know how this is going to go down.
Yeah, well, we haven't actually planned it.
Lockdown,
And you might notice that we're a little bit closer than other people might have been on previous ones. We live together, so it's okay.
Don't start any rumours.
Not like that. Okay, so Luke, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, yeah. Just the same as everyone else, lockdown at the moment. Gets you down a bit, but I'm so busy that I don't think much about it really. But good to be still doing something for the youth.
Yeah.
Can't wait to get back and see everyone and hope you're all doing well at home.
Yeah.
I'm actually so busy that right now I am working.
He is,
When
and
you're
he's
watching.
working really
No,
hard.
I'm working.
Oh yeah, he is. That's why we're pre-recording.
So, yeah.
So Luke, you're saying you're working. Can you tell us a bit about what you do?
Okay, we'll start there. So I currently, well, for a year I've been working in a residential children's home, which that is, you know, a lot of people say, is that like Tracy Beaker, if you've seen that? I don't know if you're too young
Used
for
to love
Tracy.
that.
You might be too young for Tracy Beaker, but basically it's a home for kids who have been, for whatever reason, removed from their parents. The youngest we had there was 10, the oldest was 17. Just gone through a time of change actually in my role, because the company I work for has opened up another home which is for kids who are leaving care, so like 16 and up to 25 technically, and it's kind of, the idea is that it's a bit of a more of a step back. We're not really caring for them as much, so we're providing like semi-independence kind of preparation for them. So that's what I've just started doing. We've got 2 kids in my new home. One of them I know from the previous care home I worked in, and then the other one is new and an absolute nightmare. Brief summary of what I'm doing now.
Yeah, you've had a few challenges, haven't you?
Many challenges. Yeah, you think your lockdown was hard, I've got some stories for you.
Yeah.
Come and see me.
Yeah, without, because you probably can't go into much detail about certain situations, but can you tell us probably a big challenge you've had during your work?
During my work, well, in this job, I guess it's just you can imagine the kids that we have in the children's home is for kids with emotional behavioural difficulties, and it's a therapeutic home technically, but they're like the naughtiest kids around, the most unmanageable kids around, and can you imagine them all locked in a room, all locked down in a house? It's an absolute nightmare. We've also had the challenge of like people getting COVID, staff shortages. I can think of like a particular time. It's the first lockdown. I remember we had a kid move in who was a massive handful, and I had to take him to hospital one day, and he ended up getting hold of a pair of scissors from the first aid box and running off with them, and he also jammed a pen in the ignition of the car and snapped it off, so I couldn't start the car and had to chase him down the street and disarm him and hold him until the police came. That was a bad day. But there's literally that is like a lot of the things that happen. I mean, not that long ago, I was in hospital all night with that kid because he swallowed washing up liquid, trying to kill himself. So I've got some full-on things going on. But hey, it's all experience, it's all stories.
And what I love about you is that like you come home and all you can do is laugh about. And obviously they're like really serious situations, but you do just find I guess a bright side and be able to process it a bit.
I think that's a key strategy actually, if I pass on to any of my young Padawans watching, is, you know, don't take yourself too seriously, and you know, mate, you know, they're all stories at the end of the day, and it's stressful at the time. It was stressful at the time, but afterwards I can look back and laugh about it and shock people with my crazy stories, and it just helps you get through, you know.
But no matter how many challenges you've had in this job, you've
Mm.
built some really important relationships, haven't you, with some of the kids?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I've learnt a lot about resilience, and I've learnt a lot about, you know, there's the bits in the Bible that say, you know, whenever you face trials of many kinds, consider it pure joy. And I kind of get that now. I think you don't get as refined as you do when you're out of your comfort zone and being challenged. And now, you know, I remember when I first started this kind of work, would you believe it, I used to be scared of things like even picking up the phone and speaking to the police, or, you know, driving over, doing a house visit, and like these things, like, you know, making difficult phone calls. When you do them and you confront those fears, you become less anxious about it, because it just becomes second nature. And like, I've become very resilient, maybe a bit more toughened, but very resilient now, I'd say, after all the challenges I've faced. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen how it's stretched you, but we've also seen how much you've grown through it, and yeah, we've seen that resilience growing, and just how much of a passion you've had to help these kids, no matter how much they wind you up. But yeah.
Kids are annoying. And when you're older, you'll realise how annoying teenagers are as well.
Yeah, I look back and I'm like, wow, I was annoying.
You forget what you were like.
But yeah, these kids are sometimes next level, aren't they? But you know, they just need a lot of love and care, like everyone. But yeah, so you've mentioned about like your faith and stuff like that. Can we go back a bit, and maybe could you tell us a bit about your faith journey, maybe where you started and perhaps where you are now?
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you a brief of all of that, but just the important points. I suppose I grew up in a Christian home, but the big thing for me was that I was actually born. When I was born, my dad had passed away, so I'd never met my biological father, and my mum remarried when I was maybe 1 or 2, so I've always known my father being my stepfather, but then I've always known he's not my father. That's been a big factor for me, just because me and him really clashed in personalities when I was a wee youngster, and you know, I had a lot of bad feeling towards him, if I'm honest. He had his own daughters with my mum, and it was always clear they were a bit more important than I was. That's how I felt. So I guess that was the start of it. I mean, I'll tell you a bit about my dad. It's quite a cool story, and some people might not have heard it, but basically, when my dad was very young, he had an accident where he got knocked off his bike, his little push bike, and he hit his head, and he was in a coma for like 2 weeks, but he survived, and he didn't really have many side effects apart from a small part of his brain was damaged, which later developed into epilepsy, if you know what that is, and that disease eventually got worse and worse and worse, but he, because of that, became quite depressed, and actually tried to end his life at one stage. I remember I've actually read letters that my dad has written about it, and it was just funny reading it. Like, he'd convinced himself that he was born at the wrong time and he had to die. That's the kind of things that your mind is powerful, you know, and you can convince yourself, like the narrative that you tell yourself can be very powerful, and that was his. He tried to overdose, and he went into like a sort of mental health unit, like suicide watch. That's what happens when you are at risk of harming yourself. People have to watch you so you don't. And someone reached out to him there who was a Christian, and he found faith and changed his life. And he met my mum at church. They got married. Unfortunately, his disease was getting worse. They were married for 8 years. They tried to have kids, but they were told they couldn't have them. But my parents believed that God had spoken to them and said that they were going to have a son, and they were going to call him Luke. Spoiler alert. Anyway, lo and behold, my dad actually passed away before he knew that I was conceived. And that's kind of the story of my dad. That's quite important to me, I think, in my faith journey. It's quite powerful. It makes me feel like I'm the chosen one or something. Um, but no, in my faith, I grew up in a Christian home. My parents both, my mum and my stepdad, they both went to church. I distanced myself from my family when I was young because of my issues with my stepdad, and led me to seek more approval from my pals. I'm sure people relate. And I was doing all sorts of waste man nonsense at your age. I was when I was 16, I didn't get any GCSEs. I was messing about. I was too busy, showing off to girls, smoking weed, drinking, all of that. And that's what I was doing, and I was doing that just to be cool because I thought I was cool. People who smoke think that it's not cool, kids. But that's what I was doing, and I was just going down a path that was just negative and wasn't. I had no aim really. I didn't have any ambition. I went to college after school. My parents basically chose what I was going to do because I didn't even care. I didn't have any ambition, and I just went along and did it. Did like an engineering kind of course, and then I tried to get an apprenticeship, but I was too much of a waste man. No one would employ me, so I carried on and ended up blagging like an A-level equivalent kind of diploma. I think I must have bribed the teachers or something, but don't advocate that, by the way. Anyway, for me, I was in such a lost place after I'd finished that, and I didn't have any idea what I was going to do. I still was kind of connected to the church, and I had a family that I was close pals with, and all their boys were doing the same stuff as I was doing, so that's why I was sort of close to them, and they were from my parents' church, and the big key moment for me was one of these kids, one of the boys, the oldest boy, he went away and he did like a Christian gap year with a mission organisation, and he'd come back and he'd become a Christian, and he was really different, and I remember seeing him thinking, I wonder what that's about. But it was kind of a coincidence really how I ended up doing this as well, because I was just living in this aimless space. I went round this family's house, and their dad was like one of these like ex-convict looking blokes who used to be an absolute hard man and had become a Christian. So I was a little bit intimidated by him, and I was sitting with them, and he said, and the dad said to me, so Luke, what are you doing with your life at the moment? And I was like, I thought I've got to come up with something here. So I said, I looked at the gap year that Josh did, who was the son, and he said, oh yeah, and he said, well, we're going down there on Thursday, do you want to come with us? And I was like, oh okay. So I ended up going down there, and then I went down to this. It was like it's a mission organisation that's based in Wales. It's a really small one called World Horizons, and I chatted to the person that runs their gap year, and then they said, right, so what you got to do. Well, this is our programme, right? You do 3 months in Wales, then you do 6 months in like another country, really exciting. And then all you need to do is raise £2,000, and it starts in 4 weeks. And I was thinking to myself, well, that's the end of that then, because I have £0 and 0 pence, and I don't have a job. So yeah, I went home and I thought, well, I might as well tell my parents, and I told them. And my stepdad, who's normally very tight with money, was actually really for it, and he said, yeah, we'll help you out with that. No hassles. So I was gobsmacked, and ended up going to go on this Christian gap year. Bearing in mind, I would not have described myself as a Christian back then. And it actually was, and like 2 weeks before I was supposed to start, I'd gone to my cousin's and ended up on a wild night out, and went home, and my cousin caught me sniffing cocaine in his house, and basically confronted me about it and said, right, that's it. Either you're going to tell your parents about this, or I'm going to tell my parents, because my parents hadn't got a clue. And I remember thinking at that time, well, I've blown it now. They're going to kick me out. I'm going to not go. I can't go on a Christian gap here anymore. What a silly sausage. And so I did actually tell my mum, which is quite hard, very hard, because a lot of shame, isn't it? But both my parents were understanding. Actually, they said, look, we're going to give you another chance. you can go, you know, so, and then you go on this gap year, see what happens. So I went off on this gap year with that as the context, and I met this guy called Tom, and this will make sense to a lot of people now. This will answer some questions. I met this guy Tom. He was a bit older than me. He was about 21. I was like 19, and he was a Scouser, Everton fan, and he was like a big brother really to me. I looked up to him. I'd never met like a proper lad, blokey, big guy who was a Christian, and like young, like, and was taking it seriously. And I remember one time we were getting our haircuts in Wales, and he was trying to evangelise the Welsh barber, and I was a bit embarrassed, and I was like, oh man, this is mad. But that was the start of it. A bit long-winded, sorry about that. That was the start of it, and then throughout that year, I was sort of, it was a bit of a baptism of fire. I had to, I remember one time, like in this gap year, they were asking us to lead devotionals, and I didn't even know what a devotional was. I just pretended that I did.
Do you know now?
Yeah.
You learn.
I'm not going to lead any now, but yeah, and yeah, I think the big thing for me actually over that time is I realised that I had like a Bible that was given to me at church, but it was like a youth translation Bible. I didn't really understand the Bible and like that there were different translations, and we were doing like Bible studies there, and I realised that my version was really different to everyone else's. I didn't really understand why. So I went to the local Bible shop and actually bought myself a Bible, and then I actually started reading it, and that was a miracle because I was the kid at school that when you had to choose your own book to read, I was sitting there with Where's Wally? But I actually got like obsessed with reading the Bible over that time. I read loads of it. I read like pretty much the whole New Testament. I read like all through like Samuel and Kings. I read Job. I don't know what possessed me to do that. I mean, it must be some Holy Spirit stuff going on there. But I went. Anyway, my friend Tom, he wanted to go to Brazil. So we did 3 months in Wales, 6 months in another country with missionaries. But my pal wanted to go to Brazil, so I went with him obviously because I was like his disciple, and then from reading the Bible, Brazil is such a different place in terms of when you compare it to Surrey, right? They're quite, the spiritual element in Brazil is very expressive rather than hallelujah, that's where I learned my faith, I suppose. It was a bit of a journey, and I came back quite a different person. When I came back from that gap year, I realised that I didn't really have any friends anymore because all my friends were off doing nonsense. So I had to make new friends in my church, and that was kind of the beginning of it. That's where it all started, and I was very passionate back then. I remember being convicted whilst I was out there. Someone prophesied over me that I needed to stop being afraid of telling people about my faith, and I was like, oh, that was a big revelation to me. It didn't even occur to me you were supposed to do that until then. So I got like some Alpha Course leaflets and went around like giving them out in the street just by myself. I don't know what they did, and I remember like standing up in the front of church and like convicting everyone, because that's what you did in Brazil. You didn't do that in West Sussex, but I was like, why does everyone sit at the back of church? And everyone was really feeling awkward, but I was like, you should sit at the front, this is church, and I was so passionate back then. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So where do you see yourself after all that, like your faith now?
Yeah. You were going to ask me about challenges in my faith as well, weren't you? Yeah, I'll go on to that a bit. But yeah, so, I mean, since then, I guess the way my faith has changed is that, like, the thing I've wrestled with is how I have, in some ways, lost that passion. Well, in many ways, I've lost that passion. I guess I was just very young back then and brash and thought I knew everything and was very down the line, black and white. And I think that's a good thing that I've changed that. I think a book that I read that really changed me about that was What's So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancey. I'd recommend reading that. But the thing I've wrestled with, I think, is how like I've changed, how my job has changed me. I think a big thing for me when I became a Christian, like I said, I've got the whole dad thing, and I had a vision when I'd become a Christian that I wanted to be like a father to the fatherless, because I kind of felt fatherless in a way. I guess, I'm never going to meet my biological father, but and I'd always wondered what it would be like to have that relationship. So, and I had a real affinity with people who were in that boat, and there's a lot out there. But I guess, and also like I really wanted to work with the worst of the worst, you know. And I even prayed that to God, like, God, give me the worst, give me the most unlovable. And I looking back at that now, I always think about the verse in the Bible. I think it's in like Mark's, I can't remember where it is, but there's a bit in the Bible where James and John are sitting with Jesus, and they say to him, one of them says to him, "Hey Jesus, can me and James sit at your right and left hand when we're in heaven? You know, it'd be really important." And Jesus is like, "Well, you can do that, boys, but you don't know what you're asking." And that's kind of what I feel like when I was asking God to give me the worst of the worst, because He did. And I've been working with the extremes of society ever since, and I can confirm it's not easy. And I think that has changed me. I was very naive and idealistic about my ability to change lives, and you have to come to terms with the fact that, like, especially in my job now, and this is the big thing, like my capacity to love these kids isn't enough, because their issues are so extreme, that rather than helping them, sometimes you feel like they're just abusing you and you're angry at them because of that. And that's been a conundrum, something I've been learning about. And I think that just through, before I was in residential care, I was a social worker, looked after children, dealing with family breakdowns, child protection issues, very high level stuff. And you've got to be kind of shrewd and ruthless, really. You can't be wet round the ears, and I learnt that very quickly. I learnt that the hard way, and I've changed in that way. I think I've probably become a bit more hardened and a bit more no nonsense and a bit more don't suffer fools gladly, because I've had to be. And I think that has affected my compassion in some ways. I don't know if that makes sense. I find myself these days tending to be less patient with things that I think are trivial, which I need to correct myself on. But yeah, that's, in some ways I think it's a good change. I think in some ways I've become more resilient, but equally I don't think it's tested my faith in my belief in God, but more in my my relationship with God. That's where the tests come for me. Does that answer that question? Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's really cool how you've been so honest about, it's not affected your belief in God, but the way you approach your faith now is so different. It's so hard. You're in such a different stage of life that it just takes a lot more discipline, doesn't it? And, but you're doing really well.
Thanks,
so if we can wrap this up now, if you can give any advice to these guys, life, faith, anything, what would you give them?
Should have pre-prepared this, shouldn't I? I was going to say maybe a couple of things, like be yourself, be comfortable with yourself. You were made by God. That's the most important thing, I think, and that's what, like, the thing that is lacking in my kids. Like, they don't have that security, they don't have that safe base. It's very important. If you don't feel like you have that, you do have that in God, and like, actually, it's okay to be you. Like, and that's what you're learning as you grow up. When you're your age, you don't really know yourself that well, but you'll learn. So you just be kind to yourself, and it's okay to be a bit different. Look at me. I'm as strange as they come, but you've got to just be comfortable. And like I said, don't take yourself too seriously. Laugh at yourself sometimes. You don't have to get it right the whole time, and you won't. At your age, you've got so much time, which you don't realise really. You've got so much time to learn. You know, and you know you won't come in and be great at everything. You might think you are, but you won't, and you're not. Yeah, I'd say that, and also just like challenge yourself. You know, push yourself out of your comfort zone. Face your fears. That's what I'd say. Because the more you shy away from them, the more grip they will have on you. You know, and actually, I mean, it's a silly example, but even like, you know, driving, for example, sometimes people might be fearful about driving. If you get in the car 10 times, you won't be that fearful anymore because you got used to it. You've got to take that step, you know. And you know, the more stuff you do like that will build your resilience. And I think you've got to know that, you know, God is working despite you. That's what I always think. That I'm always working to derail myself and others, and God is always there to steer me on track, even when I'm not being a great son to Him. Those are my wise words of wisdom. I made all that up just then.
They're very wise though.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you for doing this interview.
That's all right.
Very inspiring. Hope you found it good, guys. And yeah, if you have any questions for Luke, then send them in. We'll have to get back to you.
Can't answer them now,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I'll answer them at another point.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Yeah. Looking forward to the lockdown.
I mean, I'll see you because I'll see you at home. But yeah, and I think now we're going to go to Chris, who's going to do our talk. So see ya. Cool.